I want to do a couple things real quickly that I think would be useful as we move forward, talking to some folks around the table. What are we doing the rest of this year? What happens next year? Let me do a couple things. First of all, I want to just juxtapose, and I know history lessons can be tedious, so I won't make it long, but what got it started with the stand-up guys against the wall there in '65 and where we are now in terms of community action. So in '65, and I was there, Michael Harrington published a book called The Other America. And what that did was it exposed the level of hunger in America and really what was then termed child malnutrition, child malnourishment. And people weren't just food insecure, they were hungry and starving and had inverted belly buttons and Appalachian, all that. So that was part of the Hunger in America piece. The Kennedys toured West Virginia and through Appalachia, and we saw abject poverty. What was also happening then was America had an inordinately high infant mortality rate. Babies were dying younger. The good news was there were jobs available. If you graduated from high school, even if you didn't, you could get a job or go into the military, and there was some kind of career opportunity. But it was in the context of poverty that was happening, malnourishment that was happening, infant mortality, civil rights inequities, and that was '65. So where are we now? We still have poverty. We have the highest number of poor people in America that we've ever had, 47.2 million poor people. 1 of every 3 Americans is now poor or near poor, and 1 of every 6 Americans receives SNAP or food stamps. It's not eligible for SNAP or food stamps, that gets SNAP or food stamps. And if you're an African American kid growing up in America, chances are by the time you're 18 years old, there's an 80% chance you and your family will have been on SNAP or food stamps, which is good because poor people need to eat and people need to be fed. But what's happened is child malnourishment and basically starvation has now turned into food insecurity. You know, people aren't sure how they're going to make it to the end of the month, or they may not be sure where the next day's food or meals are coming from. The labor market is totally inverted. You had a job or you had opportunities for jobs in '65. Now there are 3.54 workers looking for every available job that's there. How does community action respond to that? But the big story on Action News that's changed from '65 to now, that's a problem that we have to deal with and we can deal with, is what's called income inequality and wealth inequality. The difference between the top 1% of the 1% and the bottom 60% of Americans, and what that means. So this has all come in the context of our 50th anniversary, and people that haven't paid attention to us, whether it's media or foundations or elected officials, are saying, hey, you guys have been around 50 years, what's worked? And of course we have the cynics that say nothing's worked, and we've all heard the expression, you know, I've seen the tape of President Reagan, ha ha ha, we had a war on poverty and poverty won. Okay. Well, that's not true. And the data bears that out. And I'm not going to get into a number crunch here, but this is important because these are the kinds of questions that if you haven't been asked, you're going to be asked during the year, that your politicians are going to want to know, that the naysayers are going to want to know, and that you should be ready to talk to, letters to the editor, media people, and what have you. The fact is that the war on poverty has worked. Now, back in the '60s, they developed the poverty measure, which was, you know, for now a family of 4 is $23,000 and change. That measure was just based upon a very limited formula about how much do you spend on food. And since then, what people have looked at is what's called the supplemental poverty measure. And why that's relevant and why that's important, it takes into account EITC, if a family gets EITC. It takes into account unemployment benefits. It takes into account Medicare and Medicaid services, if you get that. It also takes into account other kind of tax credits and benefits and SNAP and food stamps. And it gives you a better picture of what really poor is. So if we look at poverty back in '65, when the war on poverty started, and where we are now, using the supplemental poverty measure, the better measure, this is what we find. That in '67, using the measure, the poverty rate in the United States was 26%. Using that measure now, the poverty rate, still too high, is 16%. But that's a 10% drop for overall Americans. In terms of seniors and the elderly, Using the standard poverty rate in '67, the poverty rate for senior citizens was 47%. It's now 15%. Still too high, but a 30% difference. And for kids using the standard, the supplemental poverty measure, poverty rate in '67 was 29%, and it's now 19%. I tell you these numbers because what the answer is, the war on poverty works. It makes a difference. It's helped people, and we've reduced poverty. And the numbers are still too high, but when somebody says, well, the war on poverty didn't work, say no. Say no quickly and right away. That's not what the numbers show. That may be a nice little catchphrase you want to put on a conservative bumper sticker, but that's not true. The safety net works and the war on poverty worked. Now, a lot of us have been making the case that the work we do is important for moral reasons, because it's important that we help people, that we care about our neighbors. Some people get biblical and go to Leviticus. You should not stand idly by the suffering of thy neighbor. It's one of my favorite verses. We're also getting to the extent that not only is what you do with community action important morally, it's also good economics. Fact is, the work you do, social safety net, war on poverty, reduced poverty by a third from 1967. The other fact that happens is you'll hear certain politicians say, well, these programs create a hammock. The safety net doesn't help people. The safety net's a hammock. It traps people in poverty. When they get into these programs, they feel trapped. Well, that's not true. The fact is that poverty programs, safety net programs, Pell Grant programs, programs that you do, 70% of people in America benefit by those programs at some time in their life. Like this guy, okay? So when you hear the conservatives say, well, if you're part of these programs, you become trapped and you're poor forever, we all know that's not true. And the fact is that a lot of people in the middle class and even upper class, because I understand there are young people in upper class families that do drugs and get into trouble, they benefit by some of the safety net programs as well. So we need to say that no, it's not just poor people, it helps people of all income classes and what have you, and that's what we do. The third issue that's going around, which in part of the income inequality, which I'll get to some stuff real quickly, is what's called economic and social mobility. You heard the Secretary of State talk about, if you're born in the wrong zip code, does that trap you in certain areas? Well, that's what the research shows. What community action does, what you all do every day, is you help create social mobility. You help kids and families and other people that are trapped in circumstances when they were born or through bad decisions or health crisis or whatever, or job loss, become more socially mobile and economically mobile. And that's what we need to talk about. So the other piece is that poverty is not a zero-sum game in the country. The critics say, well, we should just do away with these programs because the poor will always be with us and what have you. The fact is that the good research shows, and for those of you that are policy wonks, I've got numbers and I can do footnotes and you can hang out later and I'll pass business cards and you can get a term paper for your grandson to finish community college with and all that kind of stuff, is that poverty costs the U.S. economy $500 billion every year. That's the price we pay for poverty. That's absenteeism, that's poor health, that's incarceration, that's increased crime rates, it's low productivity for people that are there for various reasons. So if we do nothing, it still costs us a lot. So here's the response that we can say. The safety net increases, community action increases, economic mobility, we lift people out of poverty, we bring poor children into the middle class, we promote economic growth, we don't create a poverty trap, and in fact, these programs are not disincentives to work, they help people to work. These are the facts.